This is working, okay. Welcome back. I just wanted to reintroduce Dr. Karin Walsh, who's again from Children's National Health System in Washington, D.C. She's a pediatric neuropsychologist, and I just feel like that is such an important part of NF, just the cognitive aspects and learning and so forth. And so I knew that we wanted to have that well represented here, and so I'm really glad that Karin accepted my invitation to come and represent that aspect of what we do. And so I will go ahead and turn the microphone over to Dr. Karin Walsh.
Hello again. All right, so I've packed a ton of stuff into this, so keep your fingers crossed that I'm going to get through it all. But if we don't, we'll just stay, right, and bump the next person. No, I'm just kidding. No, thank you very much. I'm very excited to give this talk, and this is a little bit different than ones I've given before, where I've spent the half hour really talking about what's wrong, what kind of disabilities we often see in our kids with NF1. And this is in part that, but more briefly, and then talking about, how do we help our kids thrive? How do we get through these challenges to really give our kids the best chance possible through childhood and also into adulthood? Many of these kids really go on to do great things, so we're their support team in getting them there. So what I will do is talk about, before we talk about learning disabilities, I think it's important to talk about how do we learn as human beings, and then what can go wrong with that, and what can get in the way of that. There are many common problems, cognitive problems, that do interfere with learning, and we're going to talk a little bit about what those are in general, but then also specific to NF. I'm going to apologize to this side of the room because I have to sort of look this way, so I won't be looking your direction very much. Talk about where learning disabilities can impact children, so what environments, and then what interventions we can use to help kids and help get over these hurdles. So in terms of how do we learn, I think this is really fun to think about, and we're thinking about infants all the way through adults. There are different ways that we learn things, and if you think about a little baby, and using walking as an example, when they're very tiny, they don't have the muscle strength or the physical ability to walk, but when they start to get stronger, how do they learn to walk? Well, they've watched you walk around, right? And then they start to realize, you have to stand up, because I saw mom and dad stand up before they walked. And then, I'm not strong enough yet, so I start to use the couch and some furniture to get myself going. But then my mom and dad also hold my hand when I'm starting to get going, and they help me out, right? So they've modeled it for me. They give me a demonstration. They've also then structured and supported it so I can try this out, and eventually I'm running. And that's one example, but all cognitive processes kind of happen the same way, right? So we're watching. Kids are very good observers in infancy, and they learn a lot from watching. And even older kids learn a lot from watching others. And when you think about the social aspect of life, you learn a lot about socialization through watching other kids and adults and how they treat each other and how they interact with each other. Play is a vital part of learning in childhood, and unfortunately in this day and age we have sort of under-recognized that, we undervalue it. Schools are really kind of minimizing recess time, and it's unfortunate because not only do you learn about social engagement and social development in your playtime, you learn cognitive skills in your playtime. When you can't get those Lego pieces together but you figure it out, you've learned something very valuable about problem solving, about flexibility. So there's a lot of opportunities in play, and I would argue that kids with learning disabilities, that play-type learning or that non-traditional learning environment is even more valuable. And then, of course, we have direct instruction, which is what we think about with classes and courses, whether you're talking about first grade or college, where somebody's teaching us something specific, calculus or geometry or writing or literature. So what are learning disabilities? They're problems that affect the brain's ability to either receive and take in information, to process it, to analyze the information that's coming in, or to keep it and store it for use later. And any one of those pieces can be disrupted by any number of different things that end up becoming a challenge in learning. So there's different sources and types of learning disabilities. Certainly if you have an intellectual disability and you have really poor reasoning skills, and some kids are born that way or develop that in some way, that can certainly interfere with learning. This doesn't tend to be the problem in NF, by the way, and we'll kind of come back around to that. Also common are neuropsychological deficits, so things like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or inattention, even if you don't reach that level of ADHD. Executive dysfunction, and we'll again circle back to that for more detail. Language deficits, so your ability to comprehend what people are saying and to be able to express your thoughts and things that you know. And then visual spatial deficits can get in the way. We think about, again, even from a young age of putting things together, being able to appreciate space, and all the way up into things like geometry. Mathematics tends to be interfered with when you have real visual spatial deficits, because just lining things up. So it's not necessarily the calculation process, but it's really the spatial process of that. And you can see how you might be able to calculate a math problem just fine, but if you've misaligned your addition problem, you're not going to get the right answer, and you're not going to get the point for that question. Those are two different things. If you can't do the calculation is one thing. If you've misaligned your problem and it's a spatial problem, that's a different source of the problem. And so it's very important to identify what is the source of the disruption, because we can do things about that. We can use grid paper to help you line up your problems if math calculation was not your issue. And then there are specific learning disabilities, and these are driven by our DSM, so our diagnostic manual. And those are really we think about those more in the school context, so specific disabilities in reading, writing, or in mathematics. In NF1, so I was just talking to a lovely couple outside, and we were talking about, 10% of kids in the regular population have ADHD. It's much higher in NF1. Not everybody has ADHD, but it's something we look for and we watch for to make sure it's not going to interfere. So problems with staying focused, getting refocused, problems with impulse control. These can be big problems and challenges in the learning environment for kids with NF1 and adults. Then the executive functions. I always like to talk about this, and if you've had a neuropsych eval, you've probably heard this term, you've probably talked about it, you probably know it very intimately, and if you haven't, I think it's nice to talk about. Executive function as a label is just sort of an umbrella term, and I like to describe executive function as the conductor of an orchestra. I think it's a nice way to think about this. The job of the conductor is to orchestrate, right? You have many, many people in this orchestra that you have to conduct, you have to pull together to make a symphony. So if you're not conducting and telling, the piccolos what to do, things are going to fall apart pretty quickly. So the conductor's job is to pull all these different important pieces together to make a whole and to make something that's functional. Executive functions work the same way from a cognitive standpoint in all of us humans. And under that conductor, so the players in the orchestra are attention and regulation. So being able to be in a classroom, not be tapping your friend when you're not supposed to, be on the job and be focused on what you're being asked to do. Short-term memory, which we also call working memory. That's that I always give the example of, when you go into the grocery store with your mental list, how well you do with that or not. And I said up here, my short-term memory was not good with part B of somebody's question. So it's that active working memory. It's not the long-term stores of memory. But those are very important. Flexibility, another key piece. Being able to figure out that didn't work, so what else can I do? And if you're not particularly flexible, you get stuck a lot, and you might really need some help getting past that. Planning and organization, key factors, and most of the stories I hear will be about messy backpacks and things all over the place and not having what you need when you need it. That falls under, that's a player in this symphony. And monitoring yourself, being able to know, I'm doing okay towards that goal, or I'm not, and how do I need to change the trajectory so I can get to my goal? In NF1, school performance problems are highlighted, and I would argue that's not just for NF1 because school is where kids reside. That's what they do when they're kids. We go to our jobs and do our work for the majority of the day. Kids go to school, and so it's a real good place to see when there's problems because that's where they spend a good majority of the time. So it's estimated that 70% of kids with NF1 are not achieving their full potential. And that may be a specific learning disability, or it may be just more some general difficulties. But those specific learning disabilities of reading, mathematics, and writing are seen in 40 to 65 range of kids with NF1, which is higher than the general population, which is about 30%. So just a quick note on that intelligence piece. As many of you probably know, these kids are smart. They don't have problems with intellect. They may have a bit of a downward shift kind of in the low 90s when it comes to them as an entire group of people, but that's not the problem. I mean, we're not really talking about kids who can't reason, who can't think, and can't learn. That's clearly not what's happening. And this is not usually the big factor when it comes to learning challenges. Oops, I went back, sorry. I think as a pediatric neuropsychologist, we really pride ourselves on being able to think about things in context and developmentally. And if your child does have difficulty with attention, let's say, it will look very different in kindergarten than it looks in 7th grade. And it will manifest over time, and it can change. Part of that is going to be context dependent, so where they are being asked to do things and what they're being asked to do. And then part of it is that attention and executive function develop over a very long period of time. So, you don't expect a 2 or 3-year-old to be super attentive and have good impulse control. It's very typical for them not to have those things yet. That's normal, right? But if you see a 10-year-old who's doing some of those same things and really can't stop touching other people's things and really can't stop talking over you and really can't stay focused and is kind of just all over the place, that would be more atypical for that age, because developmentally we know those things start to really, by 8 and 9 and 10, we're seeing that come together really well from a developmental perspective. So it allows us to kind of look at the differences then. If you don't look like what we expect at 10, or that range of expectations, why might that be, and what can we do to support you then around that? And back a piece to the contextual, so when we're seeing kids for evaluations, we really think about it as a snapshot in time. It's, my evaluation of a child at 6 years old does not determine everything I need to know about the rest of their life at all. It tells me what they're doing now and what we need to do right now. And this is back to the question in the panel session, too, about how often we might see someone. It's sort of dependent on what kinds of difficulties we're working with and trying to track and manage how often we would want people to come back in. So, I always think about kindergarten. Well, that's kind of easy, right, for the most part. First of all, you might only be in there half a day, so you don't do big, long spans of work time. Also, your teacher gave you everything you need. Here's your crayons and the scissors and the construction paper, and come on over to sit in your seat, right? And so there's not a whole lot that you need to do as a child from that kind of monitoring standpoint, except just not cut your neighbor's paper and, go ahead and sit down with all your goods and do your work. But then you get to go up and play after about 10 minutes of work. So often in kindergarten, we're not hearing from families a lot about problems. But let's say we get into 3rd grade now, right? And now the teacher is not setting out your materials for you. In fact, you're expected to definitely have them on your own. Get them either from your little box that you have stuff in, or maybe you have a cubby. You have to know where your seat is and what time you're supposed to be in it. You might even have some homework by then that you have to take home and remember to bring back in. Classic example, complete homework still in the folder in the backpack, right? These are executive functions. This is where we really see things fall apart, but you can see that it's partly demand-based. It's not that probably that child developed difficulty with these executive functions just in 3rd grade, but they're showing themselves in ways that we can see them now. So we sometimes call it like growing into a deficit. So it's something that may have been always sort of going on or disrupted developmentally, but it really doesn't show up until the demand is there for the skill. There are many settings, there are different settings where learning problems can interfere with functioning, certainly at home, just following basic daily routines, being ready for school, getting ready for bed, those kinds of things can be difficult. Getting the homework done, I think, is a common challenge. At school, certainly you have to listen to your teachers. You have to know what to expect. You have to participate in your class, get your work in on time. And again, as you go in through the grades and you get older and older, there's more and more demand for that kind of skill. Social development, another key piece. Problems with attention and executive function can certainly interfere with socialization. So maybe you're the kid that's always too close. You talk over the other kids. You interrupt them when they're doing something, and then the other kids kind of don't really get you, so they start staying away from you, right? And again, if you're not good at monitoring yourself and sort of having a bit of that recognition, then you don't kind of get it. You just wonder why it's not working out. And then it doesn't set you up to know what to do about it, right? So for us to identify that as part of the social challenge can help us then guide giving children opportunities to socialize and be better incorporated into the group. And then, as you go through and you're sort of in adolescence and early adulthood and you start having jobs and stuff, certainly learning problems can interfere there. You have to get to work on time, right? Even more so than getting to school on time. You have to complete or meet goals that your boss has set for you. Organization is a big piece of having a job. You have to contribute to the team and be a good colleague and a good team member. So throughout the lifespan, there are many opportunities for difficulties to show themselves, but then there's equal opportunities for us to make it better. So, again, in the conversation I was having in the hall, it's like, it would be great to say, here are the 5 things you need to do and everything will be fine. But of course, it doesn't work that way, and there are no definitive answers. But there are a lot of answers, and I think of this as very much a process. There's not one intervention for everyone and for every problem. And even kids who have similar difficulties won't necessarily respond to the exact same interventions. So part of it is problem solving with families, really sitting down, getting to know you and your family and your child, and figuring out what context this is causing problems in and how do we work with that, and how do we help educate other people that are in those environments to help work with you. That's the key to moving forward. Identifying the strengths, as I was saying before, and the weaknesses are vital, and I often talk about that. People are usually in my office to find out what's wrong, and I also want to know what's right. Because using someone's natural strengths, and we all have them, no matter who we are, using those to help us accommodate weaknesses is the best way to go, because you're working with something that's just naturally there, right? I'm not trying to make you be a good mathematician if you're not, but I might use some of your other skills because maybe you're very good visually, and I can translate mathematics into something visual or hands-on instead, and I can help you learn that skill a different way. That's the key. And then acknowledging the things that you're not the best at, and again, knowing that so you can advocate for yourself. Interventions definitely need to be multimodal. They have to happen in different ways and in different environments to have the most success, and they need to be very flexible. And I think this is a challenge sometimes, is you'll set maybe an educational plan at school in 1st grade, and I've heard stories of sort of we're in 5th grade and nothing has changed. That's not appropriate. It's not going to be working, because what that child needed in 1st grade is drastically different than what the demands require in 5th grade. So if that stayed the same, it's not going to be appropriate anymore, and we need to change that. So that flexibility. So we're talking about the long-term flexibility, but even in the moment, right? This isn't working as I'm trying to help this kid out. What can I do differently, maybe? There are multiple intervention approaches. So medication may be an approach to addressing symptoms of ADHD. There's also behavioral approaches to ADHD and managing those symptoms. Behavioral and therapeutic interventions, both from a speech-language therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, those kinds of direct services, as well as just more in-the-home behavioral strategies to manage things that you're trying to work on and make improvements. And then supportive, and I think this kind of a community is exactly what I'm talking about. And when we had questions in the panel, it takes a village for raising kids, period. And certainly if you have kids with needs and it's very important to have the support as parents. It's important for the kids to have support and a place to not only just talk, but to get ideas. I mean, really the panel is great, but more great things came out of the audience, because that's your life, you're experiencing it, and you have a lot to offer each other. So that kind of supportive care is vital. There's some general concepts about supporting learning. So this isn't specific to ADHD or a reading disability or anything like that. This is just general support for kids who might struggle with sort of just regulating, keeping it together, being organized. Increased structure. Home and school, we're sort of talking about all environments. This is really important. And what I often hear parents tell me that sometimes teachers are saying, or other people that are in these kids' lives are saying, is that, well, they shouldn't need me to help them with that anymore. They're old enough to do that on their own. And the reality of it is, some kids might, that are typically developing and not have any difficulties, might in fact be able to do certain skills at certain ages, but this child is not there yet. And they do need more structure. So I really cringe when I hear that. I shouldn't need to help you anymore. But you do. And if we help kids when they need it, at those moments, we will get them to be more independent. They might not do it at the same time frame as everybody else. Did I really get the 5-minute mark already? Okay. Is that true? Oh, gosh. Okay. Anyhow, let me just say then, my slides will be available if anybody wants them, and I have a handout back there for some resources too. And modifying your strategy is again key, just being in the moment. If a kid gets a math worksheet and sits there and really can't manage it because it has 50 problems on it, then take your scissors and cut it into strips and have them work one strip at a time. I mean, sometimes it's really the simplest things. The child will then be able to accomplish that goal successfully. They will not be as frustrated, and the work will get done. And if you have to tape it back together to go to school and put a note to the teacher, I'm all for it. I'm okay with that, because otherwise the alternative is that it doesn't get done, the kid has a complete meltdown, like we've all seen our kids do with homework, and is very frustrated with the whole situation. And guess what? That sets up the next homework session not well, right? So if we can just be flexible and be thoughtful as much as we humanly can in those moments and accommodate what that kid needs at that moment, we can really help teach them to do that for themselves as they get older. That's what we're doing here. We're modeling, we're structuring and supporting how they will do it on their own later. And every time you do that, it may not seem like you may feel like we're not getting anywhere at home. You are, because every single time you do that, your child's getting more from that. And there will be a day where you go, I didn't have to tell him about that. And you'll be stunned. And it takes a while, but that will happen. And these kids are independent, and they become great adults that are, many of which are sitting in this room, that can tell you it's not easy, but you keep moving forward. And if you have the right supports in your family, in your community, and in the schools, you really can achieve a lot. And reinforce good work, even the smallest thing. Right? So if you do have a homework session that really went well, make sure you acknowledge that, especially if that's been a challenge. So what I'm going to do, since I clearly have too many slides, I sort of broke these down more, which I think, again, I'll hand these slides out. I'm not going to go through each one of these, with the exception of maybe a couple points, but sort of this idea of, oh, I get 5 more minutes? Awesome. This showing, don't tell. Set expectations, I think, is my next one, which is a really important piece. Sometimes kids have no idea what they're being asked to do. We think they know, but they really don't know exactly what they're being asked to do. So there's no way to succeed there, right? So they try lots of things, they're not hitting the mark, but we haven't really told them exactly what we want. So the more that we can do that and set real specific expectations, when we say, like, you need to behave, that's a little too vague, right? But what does behave mean to you right now for that child? And that's what you need to say is, you need to stop this behavior, and what I want you to do is this. And then modeling good stuff and reinforcing when they do the good behavior and the thing that you're trying to get them to do. So setting expectations is a real helpful tool. We talked about flexibility and modifying, so I'll kind of move through this a little bit quickly. And I talked a little bit about this. So breaking things down is often a recommendation I'm making. The amount of work can be very overwhelming. So again, it's not that a child with NF cannot complete the work. It's that it might not be able to complete 20, word problems, but they could do 5 at a time. And they can eventually finish the 20. So it's just little things. It's not, these are not inabilities to do this, to learn, to work, to contribute, to be part of the community. These are just, we need a different way to do that. We need to modify that approach. I always tell the kids that I work with and the families, there are many, many ways, first of all, to define success in terms of your life. There are also many, many pathways to that end, to the same endpoint. And you can choose, you can go about that anyway, and you still get to the same point, and it really doesn't matter how you got there in the end, as long as you're getting where you're trying to go and you have a happy, successful life in what way you define that, and that you are thriving. I keep going backwards. There are a couple, real briefly, there are a couple really structured and researched approaches and interventions. So there's this organization, time management, and planning training that I don't know is available all that much from a clinical standpoint at this point that I'm aware of, but has been done and has been used in some research protocols. Obviously, that's focused on executive function development. And you may have heard in your community about people called executive coaches. Sometimes they're psychologists or teachers or other people that do therapeutic interventions specifically on these executive function kind of abilities and building those up over time, and those are great resources. There's computerized cognitive training, which again, there is available in clinical settings and has been done in research. I'll give you a quick example slide in a second. And then there's an idea about supported cognition I'd like to just quickly introduce you to. the organization time management and planning training, so this is focused on mostly kids with attention problems, and it's about the rate of learning. So again, not learning or not learning, it's how quickly, or you may need additional time or additional structure to learn to get to the same point. And this, the emphasis is on direct instruction, so prompting, monitoring, and praising, right? Again, when we're thinking about just that walking example from infancy, come on, let's try to walk, right? Then monitoring, how are you doing with that? And then really praising, that was a great job, good job. You can take it really back down to the basics when you're thinking about helping kids even at older ages. So I'm going to skip those couple, and again, we can talk about them later. There's computerized cognitive training, so something called CogMed we've been doing some research at Children's with, but it also, I've seen it available in a number of clinical practices, at least in our DC area. This is like a computerized game. It's web-based, so you can do it from home, and it's sort of like 25 sessions of training. It uses this cool little robot, and there's different games, so it trains working memory. So a lot of times remembering digits and then having to remember digits backwards, and it spans that out so it gets longer and longer, and you build, you've seen probably ads on TV like Luminosity, I think it is, and things like that, where it's like brain training. So they have a lot of apps for adults now. I don't know what their value is because I don't think they've been researched necessarily, but it's the same idea of just practice and enhancing your skills and building upon the baseline skills. And then supported cognition, this is an intervention that sort of models the like an apprenticeship. And I really like this too, because it's the idea of a scaffolding. And when you think about vocational training, this is very much what's being used. When we're doing on-the-job training, you have a mentor, you have an apprentice, right? And you are teaching them exactly what to do. And I think applying that model and that framework to helping our kids is very helpful, thinking of them as our apprentices. Okay, I got my time thing, so I'm going to close up here. And I just want to say that, children and adults thrive when learning problems are correctly identified and monitored, when the interventions and accommodations are developed considering that person's unique strengths and weaknesses, when they're flexible and they are adjusted to meet the environmental and developmental needs of that person, and that they're supported with positivity and optimism. And as you heard me say in the last session, if you have hope leaving my office, then I've done a pretty good job, and I'll continue to follow you and help you continue to have hope moving forward. That's the key. As long as we're all in it together and we're motivated and hopeful, we'll be able to achieve a lot of things together. And so will our kids, because they really do a great job. This resource list, don't worry about, is printed out. Trace Ann, thank you, printed out copies, and I think she has a table out there, so you can just pick it up. And it's just some ideas about intervention strategies, books, things that I've found helpful in our clinical practice for our families that you might find helpful as well. So thank you very much. Sorry for the pace, but I appreciate it.